So, Andrew Callahan, when did you know Mayo was getting fired?
Walking the concourse at Gillette Stadium back to the press box, and Adam Schefter's news broke on my phone. And I had never been more confident going into that game that Jerod Mayo could be fired. But even then, you're talking like, if you want to do percentages, like 30, 35%. And that was something I kept to myself. I wasn't going to put that out there because then people run with it. And I'm like, what do I know? It's either my guess or my guess of somebody else's guess. But that's when I knew. I was like, okay, they're not messing around. They have someone in mind, and they're going to move fast, which is pretty much exactly what Robert said yesterday.
Okay. So, why? So, no one thought that he was going to get fired halfway through the season. No one thought, everyone thought that he would be at least given 2 years from what you've gleaned, in your opinion, as someone who covers the team. What was going on? But why fire him? You knew that they weren't going to be good. You knew that the roster wasn't there. You knew you didn't surround him with anyone with much experience. It seemed like he was kind of set up to fail. Why fire him, and why do it as quickly as they did?
So in asking around, and I think, honestly, if you've just watched and listened closely enough, there are a couple things that come to mind. Number one, and I wrote this after the Chargers game, that 11 months after Jerod Mayo was hired, the number one reason to keep him was still the same as it was when you hired him in the first place. Potential. It wasn't anything that you heard from this team. It wasn't anything that you saw from them in the field. It certainly wasn't anything you saw or heard in his press conferences. So when you have a sure thing like Mike Vrabel out there, okay, and we'll get to him later, there's no argument not to let go, cut bait, make an upgrade, which obviously they wanted to do. Number two, it wasn't just the losing, because I get the argument, hey, he was 4-13. He had a worse roster arguably than Belichick. That's Belichick's last record. Well, first of all, Bill got fired because of that. Number two, there were things behind the scenes that led to the play on Sunday that were untenable. Like, this defense broke in a way that we had never, ever, ever seen for two and a half decades beforehand, right? And like fundamental stuff, tackling, okay? Keeping contained or setting the edge, basic fundamental things. They couldn't get through to players, and the way that you had players speaking about themselves, their teammates, and their coaches was reflective of a culture that was broken. And they said, we don't believe, based on what we've heard, seen, and studied, this is going to get better. We might as well pull the plug now because he needs too much time to get moving as a real head coach.
Okay, so having said all that, these are decisions that, and as Robert Kraft said yesterday, it kind of came to a point. He also said, and we're going to get to more of this at 9 o'clock, that, the high point of the season was Cincinnati.
Yes.
Like, holy crap.
Wow.
You couldn't find anything else to attach yourself to, like maybe one
that
shiny
big
moment.
Bears win didn't move the needle at all.
No, you beat the Jets. I mean, you beat the Jets at home.
Come on, that's a given, though. As bad as it is, we could go through a deadly pandemic, Cam Newton season, the end of Mac Jones. The Jets are always there.
Well, I was there, and I was none too happy about that. I thought the Jets were going to win that game, especially when they had the lead with very little time left.
But he said that it was, this kind of like growing realization that this was going to happen. Why not pull the trigger before the end of the season, go downstairs, talk to whoever's going to coach the team in that game on Sunday and say, okay, Jerod's gone. We are obviously looking toward the future, starting with losing today's game.
It's a great question. And obviously they knew before the finale on Sunday, right?
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, I believe, had they not lost as badly as they did in Arizona, I'm not talking about like 13-point margin or 33 in the case of the Chargers games. If one or both of those games is different, he might still be here. Like, that's how close this was. But because they weren't, I'm with you. If I was going to fire him, I would do it before the finale. Tell whomever's up next, hey, this is how we want to run that game Sunday. Okay, granted, if Joe Milton goes off, as no one in the world but Fred predicted, we just got to live with it, But I didn't get it either. Like, they knew what they were doing. They let him coach, finish out the season, give the press conference, everything. He had no idea, according to Robert, that he was coaching his last game.
Okay, why did they not let him address the team after the game?
Well, he did address the team after the game, and
Okay.
he said it was emotional. What didn't happen was he didn't address the team yesterday, which is the end-of-season team meeting, locker room clean-out. But those are 15-minute meetings, very similar for every team that didn't make the playoffs. The only difference in yesterday's case was Robert Kraft spoke to the team, and Elliot Wolf did, and that was that.
When the players talked about that meeting, they didn't seem overly enthused about the way it was handled. The way I read, even your reports, what the players said to you, it didn't seem.
I agree with Fred. Everything I read was like, well, we didn't get a chance to say goodbye, that kind of thing.
And we didn't know. No one told us. Like, basically,
Yeah.
It would have been nice to know what the hell's going on around here.
But you're saying that he did address the team after he got fired.
Not after he got fired.
That's what we were talking about.
Okay, so you said after the game. So he did speak after the game. He then spoke to the media. It wasn't a goodbye. Like, that didn't happen.
Okay.
So what I would say is win more football games. Like, this is something you all shared in. And I get that you could say, I didn't really like the way the goodbye went down. Well, you don't really get a say when this is the result, I would say. I would argue back. If you want a chance to say goodbye to your head coach, give us a reason to keep him around a little bit longer.
Can I just ask you this? When they hire a new head coach and do whatever the hell they do this offseason, what if it's another disaster? Okay, because now you're in a position, what if it's another disaster? Like, what if you win 5 games next year? What do you do then? And what if it's obvious that there's something, there's like a public foible or something, something happens where there's a lot of controversy that comes on the team. There's, you're losing games badly. What happens then? Can you fire a coach the next year too?
Look, I'm not ruling anything out in the NFL ever. Like, I've at least been in this job long enough to know that. But I would want to know how it went down. If, let's say, Drake May gets injured week 1, this hypothetical where you're saying they're 5-12, they stink, that to me is the most likely way that happened. In that case, we all understand what happened. The franchise quarterback got hurt. If they're also losing in these games that just feel like a kick in the nuts over and over again, but more bad luck as opposed to this year, which was bad coaching, very evidently, then you'll probably get a break. I'll say this. Look, right now, they're the AFC Panthers, right? You're on your 3rd head coach in 3 years.
Yes.
There's dysfunction. The record is what it is. As much as they've been shamed into certain decisions, into making some changes, I think you got to let the next guy, especially because he's more experienced, whether even it's Ben Johnson as an assistant or obviously Mike Vrabel as a head coach, get a little bit more runway.
Okay. So, you can't turn around and fire another.
You can't go 4 for 4.
All right. So let's talk about this.
The Texans did that, did they not, at one point recently?
I mean, they are. Well, you defended that very, very strongly. But so there's the Elliot Wolf situation. Kraft said yesterday in the press conference that he's staying. Does that mean he's going to have this position, during the season next year?
I don't know if he'll be in the same position, but I believe in asking around that it's, for now, more likely than not, he'll be here through the course of next season. Is that still as the leader of the front office, or might that be as the number 2 or number 3 to the GM that, let's say, Mike Vrabel gets hired and he wants to bring in and says, hey, you can be here, but it's not going to be your call anymore. Okay. Do you want to do that?
We'll get into the whole Vrabel thing and giving who you're going to give to control of the front office. But what about the assistants? Now, there is a lot of controversy if the assistants have been let go. If they're under contract, do they stick around? Do they get interviewed by the new coach? Are they just here in theory? What's going on with the assistants?
They're hanging in the wind. They're under contract. And that's what the Crafts have said is like, look, we don't have to cut you. We don't have to let you go. You're going to stay here until we have a new head coach, and he'll make the call. And so I think the coaches that he wants to interview, again, let's just, for simplicity's sake, say it's Vrabel. He goes, I can do better than Alex Van Pelt. Alex, thanks for your time. I'm going to bring in a different offensive coordinator. He looks at the defensive staff and says, hey, Brian Belichick, you were a 10-year-old kid running around the practice field when I was playing here, but you know what? You've done a really good job of the safeties. I'd like to keep you. Mike Pellegrino, you oversaw Christian Gonzalez's development. Granted, first-round pick. He's done a good job. Would you guys like to stay? So he'll get to pick through the bones of, I think, this offensive and defensive staff, but I would be shocked right now if those guys weren't making calls around the league saying, hey, what else can I get?
Yeah, and you can't really fire your front office in one foul swoop before the draft, right?
Right, and that's the other part. Like, coaches' contracts typically run through the end of January, let's say mid-February, if you make a deep run of the playoffs, okay? So those decisions are coming. This is the natural cycle of the calendar and the decisions on that side of football operations. Everyone in the front office is typically up in mid-May. So not only do you have most of the hay in the barn when it comes to the tape study and the scouting reports and measurements and all the guys who they're going to sift through and pick and draft or not draft come April, But then after that is when you would typically make changes. So whether Elliot stays, and I would expect him probably, as of now, and things are fluid, to be the leader in the front office. The question of the change, just like when he was officially hired, right, last year, mid-May, that's when that decision would be officially announced or made.
Okay, because that's iffy territory. I remember the Jets had Idzik do the draft,
and then
they
fired
him after the draft.
The Bills did this with Josh Allen. And or excuse me, not Josh Allen, but the first year Sean McDermott was there, their wild card team, Doug Whaley was the GM. They go through the draft, and then they fire and hire Brandon Beane, who would work with McDermott in Carolina. And so it's not just, the Jets did it, we can do this too. This is
no, it was bad though when the Jets did it.
And worked out obviously for the Bills. So I'm not saying it's going to work or it won't. It's just more common than you might think, these temporary shotgun marriages.
Yeah, and just we got to break. But the thing that I was kind of referring to is there's this desire to blow out the entire front office, and it's well, there's a year of work that's been done. What are you just going to bring in a entirely new scouting department? 2 months before the draft. I mean, that's impractical, correct? You can't just blow everyone out. Right?
Yes.
All right. I mean, they're an operation that's still operating. I mean, they can't just clear the building out and then bring in just do a fire drill where everyone just comes back in and replaces everyone. All right, look, let's get into the Vrabel thing, because I am educating myself. I don't know why Vrabel is this can't miss guy. I read the email, made a lot of good points.
Yeah.
So but I'll ask Andrew just as a formality what his thoughts are on it. We'll be back in just a moment.
More Toucher and Hawk.
Vrabel is considered this can't miss guy. Now let me just give you what I know about him, and it's very little. Is that the Titans before he got there went 9-7, 9-7. Then he took over the team. They went 9-7, 9-7, but they made an AFC Championship game. They had good regular seasons and disappointing playoffs the 2 years after that, and then they were bad for 2 years. He didn't get a job in the last coaching cycle. Why is Vrabel this person that is I've heard nationally, if not the number one coaching candidate, the number two coaching candidate?
So you remember free agency last year and the biggest name in the receiver market?
Yes.
Who was it?
It was
Ridley, right?
Ridley.
Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
Okay.
Calvin Ridley.
Normally a 1B, maybe a 2. But because of what the market was, he was clearly the number one guy who's getting this big contract that as soon as the Titans gave it to him, everyone's like, that's too much. Patriots probably should have done it. But we know that's not his value. I'm not saying Mike Vrabel's Calvin Ridley, but I think when you go from Vrabel, Ben Johnson, Brian Flores, depending on how scared you are of what he did to Tua.
Aaron Glenn before Brian Flores.
Sure. Okay. Then there's a drop-off. That's what it is. The other part, though, is this holds up in any market. He's got a winning record as a head coach.
Sure.
Those guys typically don't come available. So when you go, he's 9-7, 9-7, made an AFC Championship game. Made an AFC Championship game.
What about Matt Nagy, though? Matt Nagy had a winning record in Chicago.
Those offenses weren't good. He's an offensive coach.
But he's in Kansas City. Oh, well, I guess because you've got Mahomes and everything. All right. Very good. I just don't.
Well, no, give me a couple more. Because when he did win, as you said, it was with bad quarterbacks.
Right.
Okay, Ryan Tannehill was the peak of that mountain. 12-5 season, number one seed in the AFC. He wins Coach of the Year. Tannehill goes, you've got Malik Willis, you've got Will Levis, some strife in the front office, and an ownership that goes, you're out the door.
No, you're right. I don't think he's a 3-14 coach. I realize there was problems there, and I'm open to him being this brilliant guy and everything. But here's the other point: is that it sounds like, and you mentioned it in the first break, that if you hire Vrabel, I get bringing in your own assistants and your own staff, coaching staff. But it sounds like they're going to let him have a say in how the front office runs. Now, here we go. Because now you're not just hiring a winning coach. You're hiring a guy and saying, take over. Do what Belichick did. Probably, it's not going to be to that degree, obviously, but kind of do what Belichick did. We're handing the franchise to you, which makes it a little bit different than just hiring him as a coach. He can coach. At worst, he's a slightly above average coach. At worst, his floor is average, right? Mm-hmm. His ceiling is he could go Super Bowl.
That's fair.
What about this whole notion that he can run a franchise?
You just don't know what he's capable of, Freddie T.
I certainly don't, and that's why I'm asking you, Andrew Callahan. I do not know what he's capable of.
I don't think they'll hand him the keys to the front office. I do think they give him significant input on who he wants to work with as a GM. And then the two of them might have equal say in what they're going to do.
But that to me is like you're giving him control because
Yes.
you're the guy who hires the guy or the guy who tells them who to hire.
Well, here's the thing. If you're Mike Vrabel, who, let's backtrack, and I'm sure you guys covered this last Friday. He's been a consultant
Don't
for the
be so
Browns.
sure.
Okay. it's not true. All shows. He's a consultant for the Browns last year. After he got fired in Tennessee, the Chargers job sounds like the only one he really wanted. They had a handshake deal with Jim Harbaugh. You're our guy. Come on down. That was kind of a done deal. So he says, okay, I'll take a year off as much as a coach can, addicted to the job and the competition. Friday, he interviews with the Jets. Friday, a Jets writer for The Athletic drops this story. I've talked
horrible.
to Mike Vrabel for 5 months.
Yeah, terrible.
He's an everyman. He connects with townies in Nashville who still root for him even though he got fired there. He connects with coaches, executives, players. He's running around. He skis. He goes to Italy with his wife. Okay?
Zach Rosenblatt wrote that.
Right.
Puff piece.
And right as it happened, great access. I thought it was well written. To
Puff
me,
piece, though. Go ahead.
leverage against the Patriots, who, as we know, 2 days later fired Jerod Mayo. I don't think any of that was an accident because the Patriots not only were in a poor bargaining position with Vrabel from the start, but once they fire Jerod immediately and open this up, like it's not just that you're 4-13 2 years in a row, 4 losing seasons in 5 years, that any coach coming in is going to be able to dictate terms. This is a guy who knows you. He knows that few coaches want to be there in the way that he does and have the experience and resume to say, I'll come in and do the job I want. So if push comes to shove, Mike Vrabel's going to win, not just because he's 6'4", 260 pounds. It's because of the position the Patriots have put themselves in over the last 5 years. So you could say, oh, I don't want him to have all the power. What's your other choice? Like Ben Johnson sounds great, but what does he know about
Okay, your
personnel?
other choice would be bringing in a guy like the Borgonzi and saying that we're hiring you as a GM and you are going to lead the coaching
Isn't
search.
that how it's supposed to happen? You hire the GM, he hires the head coach?
I would say there's no supposed to in the league.
Right. I mean, because you can't, John, and you can't really go into it thinking that because then you're limiting yourself to with coaching candidates. I think that you got to do these things, and you can't dismiss any variable.
Sure.
So like, but is Vrabel? But to add to your point, is Vrabel the guy that you get rid of that idea for? Like, right? Like, so if the traditional idea is that you would bring in a GM first and then they would build out, because the Patriots, you'd agree, have a lot of work to do in terms of just filling out their organization.
Oh, yes. Upgrading, modernizing everywhere.
Right. Okay. So this is a big job.
Yes.
Like they are, again, compared to the other 31 teams in football, like it's a very antiquated way that they run things
Yes.
in the front office. Right. So there's a whole lot of structuring and all this corporate nonsense I know nothing about that they have to do. So with that being said, I understand you don't want to limit yourself by hiring a GM and then you eliminate some coaching persons, but candidates, but you're putting a lot in the Mike Vrabel basket. You just turned around and you're on your third coach, like you said, in how many years, and then you turn around and you're handing Mike Vrabel, who had a difficult time at the end in Tennessee, and you're just going take over everything. That would make me nervous. That part of it, him as a coach would not make me nervous.
Right.
Again, that never did. You have your quarterback.
It's all the other work that needs to be done
yes,
here.
and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Like structurally, it's a disaster. They have to rebuild everything. Is Vrabel the guy to do it? That makes me nervous. Does he have the experience to do that?
So what I would say is, and going back to Wallach's question, the ideal setup is you bring them both in at the same time. Guys who have worked together before, have an established relationship, okay? And there's no coming in with, oh, they picked me first. Let's say in the case of the GM, who's always going to sit, or typically in the owner's box, and if things go badly, is kind of pissing in the ear of the owner, being like, oh, I wouldn't have called that 3rd and 7. These guys are good enough. You
Right.
know that?
Yeah, I get
because
that.
that leads to the disconnect. You have politicking. You have guys in Chicago who, granted, probably not good coaches, but have gone through again and again and again, while Ryan Poles sits at the top and go, well, the roster's good enough.
Same with Jacksonville.
Right.
I mean, I ideally, if you're going to end up with a new head coach and a new GM, going back to the timeline that you laid out earlier, what would have been, again, this is just hindsight daydreaming, but let's say they had decided Elliot Wolf wasn't the guy. If they had gone with somebody else last spring, they said, okay, Jerod Mayo is going to be the head coach. He actually puts together a suitable offensive line and maybe gets one more receiver for this team and maybe one more defensive player, like literally talking about like 3 or 4, personnel positions that are filled out. And you put an adequate roster on the field and you have the same result, the GM can look at the owner and say, this team was actually good enough to get you 7-8 wins. The problem is not the issue here. Then you go and hire the new head coach at the same time you're doing it right now with your GM in place, and you have that structure going forward.
So 2 things on that. Number one, last year, had they gone outside for the GM search, you have the same problem you do now. Okay, all the draft work is kind of in the barn. Like, you got to ride this out with the guy who put together the information. Now, to the point of, like, you want to bring in someone from the outside who knows better. I think they saw that in Elliot, who I know got closer with ownership at the end of the 2023 season. And during that time says, this is how I did it in Green Bay. This is the system I grew up in. We're not worried so much about fit, projecting these prospects. It's just who's good. So I'll overhaul the scouting system. That's what they did. They applied some of it. People in the front office I talked to said, yeah, it's coming along. Like, we're able to apply it. Granted, didn't go great with the draft. Free agency, hits and misses. But his job was not to build a roster ready to win 7-8 games this year. It was to start and initiate a rebuild. Now, I would say it's interesting how much loyalty the Crafts have to Elliot Wolf, how much they want to stand by him, potentially at the expense of Vrabel.
I just don't know what he's done for you other than drafting Drake May third after 2 quarterbacks were off the board.
Well, but he didn't have – they still have all that. They have $130 million in the cap space. He got Drake May. You gave him 1 draft, and you can't judge a draft in 1 year anyway. I mean, it's – chances are it wasn't the world's greatest draft.
Yeah, you can judge Jalen Polk right now.
Yeah, I know. But you're allowed to blow a pick. I mean, but you don't know, like, the depth of the draft. And, I mean, Joey Milt, you're training him for a second-round pick right away.
Hey, Kraft said they might have 2 quarterbacks.
Tables.
Kraft said they have 2 quarterbacks now.
Look at, hey, I ain't the GM. Joey Milton goes out and show and proves, baby.
Fred just held up Joey Milton as the reason why Elliot Wolf may not be that bad.
I was being sarcastic at my own expense.
Yeah.
You're not used to it because you never do that to yourself.
Oh boy.
I think Freddie saw the light.
Yeah, I saw that. I did. It was funny. It was funny that he played that well. All right, look, it was.
Well, let me get off.
I couldn't, but we have to break real quick. If you
I know,
got something
and you're
going
to need a little extra time this week.
All right, well then let's just break
real quick. It's just you mentioned, and I agree.
Whoa, that's a gauntlet.
I'm excited for this 2 sets line in a good way. Here's the thing, I don't believe if you're interested in being fair, and I don't mean it's unfair to fire Jerod Mayo, but truly learn about a draft class, a quarterback, or a GM. You can judge any of them after 1 year, particularly when that GM's job in the first year was not to win right away, not be competitive, reset the roster, roll over cap space, draft young players, play them, all the veterans, 1 or 2 year deals. That's it. We're moving forward. Okay. That said, because the Crafts are not interested in being fair, they're interested in winning right away. Their decision of how loyal do you want to be at Elliot Wolf, if it comes to this, and Vrabel says, look, he can be in the front office. I don't want him leading it when I take over. What do? That will test their loyalty to someone that they've trusted a lot over the last 12 months versus someone that they've known for over 2 decades. Where do they go? That's the most interesting part of this, presuming, of course, Vrabel gets close and they want to offer him the job.
Okay. And then it's funny, they get rid of Wolf, and then at the 4th pick, they take some bum left tackle that's a turnstile, and then they go whoopsies.
Yeah, Banks turns into a bust.
Yeah, now we screwed up a 1st-round pick, let alone a second. All right.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.